Hello world, and welcome to another video. In today's video, I'm going to show DxO ViewPoint a little love. Something that I've been using a few of the features just recently, and I thought I might make an interesting video just on its own. Now, I don't usually use this interface of ViewPoint, to be fair, because I am a Photolab user, and obviously if you've got Photolab and you've got ViewPoint, the functionality of ViewPoint is folded into Photolab, so you never need to leave Photolab. So it's not an application that I use in a standalone fashion very often, but it is very straightforward, and I thought it might be easier to look at it this way because then we're only seeing the functionality in here, and it's a bit easier to separate what exactly ViewPoint is doing, because when it's folded into Photolab at large, it's just kind of mixed in. So let's take a look. We'll start out with this image. I'm just in the browse, I should say. I'm in the image browser to start with. And I obviously can navigate through my folder structure. And I've just put a folder together with a few images in it for this demo. And we'll start out with this one here. So I'll just give that a wee double click. It opens up for me. And this is an image that I took just handheld ISO 11,000 or something ridiculous like that. Got them to throw, this is a local community theater. I got them to throw some stage lights on, and this is just the light that was managing to hit it. Basically, this image is going to be used for the background of a season poster that's coming up. So I was just doing a little bit of work on the image and realized that several of the things I was doing were actually involving the ViewPoint functionality. So that's kind of what launched me out on this entire path. So in terms of the overall flow of the application, it's pretty straightforward to digest. You can see here I've got one of 5. The folder of images is there, so I can actually just navigate through that way. I've got my compare tools here. I've got my one-to-one or my make it fit tools. I've got sort of flip or rotate tools. I've got a grid. So if I want to see, are things straight? Because you're obviously changing the view of things, so it's important to see how things fit in relation to lines sometimes. So I can add a grid there. And then I've also got this tool, which allows me to drop guides on here. And the guides, so this is, when I've clicked on this, it's opened this bar down at the bottom, and it gives me, these are vertical guides and horizontal guides. And this image would lend itself to maybe I wanted some horizontal guides. So I'm going to just see, hey, is this a straight line across these seats? Gives me the ability to place where it is. Is that straight? Is that straight? I can place those where I'd like to. To my knowledge, this is the only thing that's in this ViewPoint interface that I can't access in Photolab. Now, I could be wrong about that. If somebody knows better than me on that one, do call out. This is the only thing I've noticed that jumped out at me that I'm sure this one isn't in Photolab, but it is here. Handy wee feature. So yeah, I have the ability to hide those, or I don't really need to use them. So I'm going to come up here to display and do clear all guides and just get rid of them for now. And just reset, turn that off. That's all good. We've got a save button there. And then down the side here, we've got the things that we can do. We've got distortion correction. We've got auto and manual there. I'll come to that on a different image. Volume deformation, come to that on a different image, but that basically helps you with that phenomenon that happens with wide angle lenses where things near the edges of the photo are wider, appear wider than they actually are, and that helps you to bring them down to a more appropriate size, you know, for reality's sake, so to speak, so that it looks a bit less distorted and more realistic. We've got the perspective tools here, which again, I'm going to come to with another image, but this just lets you straighten up your lines. We've got lots of possibilities here. We've got the auto, we've got vertical and horizontal, we've got a square, and then we've got 8 over here, which I personally have never used the 8. I believe, to my knowledge, And again, if you know better than me on this one, but to my knowledge, that one's for if you were looking at the corner of a building and you had two faces of the building visible, that you could place out your 8 points along those to help with that whole thing. But like I said, I've never actually personally used the 8 myself. I don't do architectural stuff. And then down here we've got reshape. I will use that on this image. We've got horizon. I will use that on this image. We've got crop. I will use that on this image. And we've got miniature effect. I will use that on this image. So we'll go through this one. Like I said, this one is for a poster. So I guess let's start with the reshape. So we've got grids here that I can lay over top, 4x4, 8x8, etc. And you can see the little blue dots. And this is where I can pull to shift things around. I think 8x8 will probably serve my purpose. And there are basically two things that I want to do. And actually, you know what? I'm going to stop myself for just a second because there is one thing that I want to do before I do that reshape. I want to just come here to my horizon because this might impact how I go about the reshape. So I'll come here to my horizon, and here's another little thing. It's a tiny thing that is different in ViewPoint than it is in Photolab. And you know what? Guys at DxO, if you can bring this over to Photolab, amazing. Watch that. You see that? I click and it gives me a little zoom window. Amazing. I would love to see that come across to Photolab. That would really, really, really improve the workflow of this tool in Photolab. So I'm just going there. I'm just going to basically straighten the image based on these armrests because I feel like that's going to make the image feel like it's kind of in line the way I'm hoping. So it's given it a little bit of a shift. So that's all good. Now, coming back to my reshape tool, 4x4, 8x8, there we go. I want to just bring this corner down a little bit if I can. So I'm just going to just a little. I don't want to do a big ridiculous move. I just don't want to. It was poking up a little bit and I just want to ease it down a little. I'll double check that it's okay, but I think that's probably good enough for my purposes. The other thing that I really want to do is to raise these seats up a little bit so that it gets rid of this border here where the seats have gone away. I'm going to find this easier to do if I zoom out a little bit. So I'm just going to do my Control and minus key just to get that a little bit smaller. And then I'm just going to start to grab these and pull them up. I'm going to try to keep them reasonably even because that should give me, you know, a result that's not overly noticeable. I don't need to be too particular because, as I mentioned before, one of the things I'm going to do with this image is the miniature effect. So basically, I want to throw some bits of the image more out of focus, and this is going to be one of the areas that's more out of focus. So it doesn't need to be perfect because it's going to be blurred out anyway. Now, and again, I will readjust if I need to. You might be looking at that like I am and thinking that these seats are skewed a little bit too high up as compared to these. And you can see they do rise towards the edge there. Probably rose towards this edge, but I've taken it just a little further. I maybe back that off a touch. I think once it's blurred, it won't be particularly noticeable. So we'll see. I'll come back to it if I need to. So I'll go ahead and click apply, and it does its thing. Now, if I just want to see before and after with only the reshape tool, I can just turn it off here. So you can just see, if you look there, you can see the little, just shifted it down a little bit, but hasn't overly changed the look of the seats. And then this, I don't love that, but we'll leave it there for now. Again, I suspect it might go such that I won't be able to overly tell. So I've done that. Now I also want to do crop, and I want this to be an A3 poster. So what I did, and I've already done this, so I've already got the custom in, but you can do add custom here, and you can see it's enter a ratio of width/height. And I did that. I basically took the dimensions of an A3 in millimeters, and I put them in as they are in millimeters, and it did the maths to bring that down to sort of a lowest common denominator, I think, and this is what it's given. So this is the ratio of the A3. So I've selected that, and I'll just do this so that I can position my stuff here. So we'll go with that. And now I want these sides to be kind of equal, so we'll bring this in a bit. It's maybe gone a little too far. I'm mindful of a couple of things here. I want those sides to be fairly even. Also, if I bring this down too much, then it starts to introduce a little extra something here, although that'll be blurred. Maybe I won't fuss that too much then. So I'm just looking, is it equal between this seat and this seat? Is that about the same amount of those seats? These two seats will kind of be the stars of my show, so to speak. And this has got this cut out at the top, so that little bit that I didn't like is not so bad anyway. Maybe just do that. Let's see. Again, I can readjust this if I need to. So I'll go ahead and apply that, and we'll see what we get from there. So I've done reshape, I've done horizon, I've done crop. Miniature effect is the last thing that's left. And I've got a miniature effect tool here. I'm going to just flick things on, and it's put a miniature effect on, but I'm still not seeing the tool because I haven't clicked here. So I'll click here, and this is a pretty straightforward tool. You can probably intuit that the bit between the solid lines is the bit that's in focus, and then the focus falls off between solid and dotted. And so I can place this, like I said, I want these two seats in the center to kind of be the star of my show. So I'm just going to try to get this, rotatey. There we go. That should do. I'll take a closer look at that in just a minute. It's quite small on my screen right now, but I suspect that'll probably be okay. Now I've got this tool here. Like I said, it has rotated itself a little bit, hasn't it? Let's, 1 degree. If you're wondering, I am currently holding shift and it does not seem to be helping. Yeah, 1 degree might have to stay. I'm okay with that if it looks all right. I will check in a moment to see if it looks all right. So a couple of things down here. We've got symmetric position and symmetric blur. So symmetric position is within this tool, it's equal. From here to here is the same as from here to here. So the way that fall off goes is equal. I could change that by unticking symmetric position. And in fact, I am going to untick symmetric blur. And what we see with that is the amount of blur that's being applied is accessible right here on this little dot. And if this were ticked and I come in here and I took this one up to 55, 56 will do, and I come up and check this one, you'll see it's also at 56. So it's leading out to a blur of 56. If I untick that, this one's at 56, but I come down here now and I bring this one back down to 40. Now this one's on 40 and this one's still on 56. So that's all that's doing there. And that's more or less what I want. So I'll go ahead and click apply, and then I will just zoom in so that I can check that there's no like super obvious spot where, where it's not blurry or it is blurry and I really wish that it wasn't. Yeah. So that'll do. I might, in another world, I might spend a bit more time with my crop. I do think in looking at this that I don't love this little light bit that's at the bottom, so I probably would look to crop that out. But just looking at sort of makes a big effect. And if I just do only the miniature effect, again, really adds a lot of focus here. So there's going to be text at the bottom and text at the top, and this is just kind of giving the nice view. And yes, if you're looking at this and thinking it's a bit non-punchy, there is another step in the overall processing of this that I'm not doing in this video, which is taking it into Nik Color Effects and giving it a couple of filters that kind of give it a bit more panache, a little bit more pop. So, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I'll go ahead and click save, and it will prompt me. It's doing a new version. You see it's added by default. It's added this little extension on here, and I'll click save. Tell it 16 bits is fine. That's what I started with. and it will do its thing. Now, depending on what I wanted to do, I could go back to the browse space, or in this case, I maybe just will move forward. That's my two images, the one that I brought in and then the processed. So now I've got this image, and this was just walking up a path, and I'm actually ridiculously close to this light pole, but it was maybe, I'm going to guess at 14 or 15 millimeters. So I got a lot in the frame, including the light pole, but of course that means that things are tilting in that classic way that they do. So I'll do two things here to start. First one is this distortion. So I have manual distortion possibilities that I could look to apply. This is, lens distortion, but I can also do auto. And so it says DxO ViewPoint needs to open the original image file, and a little explanation of why. Basically, it's going to get some metadata from the original image file that will allow it to do what it needs to do. So I'll click open, and let me just look at this for a second. So this is this one, and let's drag this up, click open. There we go. Now this one already had the lens profile installed. If it didn't, it would actually, just like in Photolab, it would go off and download the correct lens profile. So here's the distortion before, and after. When I turn it off, and if I turn it back on again, it doesn't grab the auto on its own. I have noticed that a few times. That's definitely a pattern. So if you do that off and you turn it back on again, you got to click that auto button again. And of course, if that's too much for you for whatever reason, you can ease it back a little bit. But I'm actually quite happy with 100, so that's all good. Now, the other thing that I would do with this image, of course, is to try and sort out my perspective here. And I probably would just use this tool. And again, we'll grab this and bring it over here. Love this feature where it zooms in. Just kind of get that as good as I can. And I'm going to also use this tree, and I'm going to trust that this tree is reasonably straight, which means I'm going to be cheating it a little bit because obviously I can't see down there, but that does look like a pretty good line, so I think it's probably fair. If I'm not sure, of course, I've got this automatic preview, so it's going to do it just straight away. But I'll just do preview like that. And yeah, I think that's okay. I can always ease it back if it's too much, in my opinion. And yeah, it does feel a little, when stuff like this is like perfectly straight, to me, it messes with my head. So I find myself all the time just wanting to just bring, I've just taken the time to set it correctly, but when it's too straight, it just doesn't seem right to me. Maybe it's because it's next to impossible to actually see it that way. I don't know what exactly brings that about. But here we have my straight image, and you might have noticed too, when I was inside the tool before I hit apply, that there was lots of extra. And if I come down here to my crop, I can actually get at some of that extra. If I want to go to unconstrained, I can lift this up and get a little bit more of that sky in the top. Yeah, so you can grab that. And away you go. And I suppose, if you were off later on to Photoshop to do some generative fill, you could grab even more of that if you wanted to. So that is that image. That's perspective correction and easing back the intensity. And also I did the distortion correction, where it's finding the information and doing the distortion corrections based on the lens profile. So that's it for that image. I'll click save and OK. This time, for giggles, I will just pop back here to my browse section and grab this image. Now this is an interesting example, I thought, because I can highlight something that's important to keep in mind. A really, really handy tool is volume deformation. I'm not going to do distortion correction on this just because it's the same thing and it'll save me time to not. Volume deformation. So I'm looking here and I think that this rubbish can looks a little wider than it actually would be. So that leads me to, and also this, it feels all a little wider than it actually would be, which leads me to want to put on volume deformation. And you can see here that I have two choices. I've got diagonal and then I've got horizontal and vertical. And there's a reasonably big difference with what happens with these. And the thing to be careful of that I wanted to highlight is if you choose diagonal, which sometimes you just basically need to try them and see which one's better for your image. But sometimes this is better. But if I do this, it introduces a bit of a bow to my image, which I then would need to try to correct separately, which, maybe you can do that, but with your reshape tool, but it's a little tricky. So if you can avoid it, I might suggest that you avoid it because it'll be easier to keep it natural. And you can see what's going on there. If I come down here while that's on and I do my crop tool, you can kind of see in the background here. Actually, let me take the mask opacity down or up. You can see how it's kind of bowed it out. It looks like an old-fashioned TV screen shape. So I'll just bring that back down. And if I come back up here to my volume deformation and I click on the horizontal and vertical, it's kind of, you can see it's taking a very different approach. It's kind of, in this case, it's kind of pulled things up quite a bit, which is stretching this out. So I think for me to make that rubbish can look in a way that seems right to me, maybe a little bit of both there. Then of course, still got my crop tool open, handy. I'm going to go ahead and regain some of that. If I wanted to, I could regain the top and bottom if I wasn't worried about the overall aspect ratio of the photo. But to me, that's a fine result, and I've kept my line straight. So just being mindful of that. Now, in terms of straightening this up, yep, again, can grab this. If I do auto, pretty decent. Yeah, pretty decent, actually. So maybe I'll leave that because I've already shown using the lines to do it. So again, I might just ease this back a little bit. Like I've said before, sometimes when it's like too perfect, it doesn't feel right to me. So I'll just ease that back a little bit. And that is all good for this image. So I'll go ahead and click save. And just pop back here. Now I've put 2 in here because basically this one had better warping on my face, but it's blurry. So I'll go with this one. My face is wider than it really is. So there is something there to correct, but it's sharp, whatever. So again, into the volume deformation. If I click on this, I think it's maybe taking it a touch too far. So I could bring my intensity down a bit, but again, I find, and you really, if this were an open field, it would be not a worry in the world. It would be perfect. But because I've got sort of architectural straight lines in it, it's kind of messing with that. So I'm better off going with this one, I would suggest. And yeah, it's probably looking pretty good. Maybe my face isn't quite that thin. So maybe go about there. Let me see how I feel about that. So just for the record, that did the same thing, turned it off. It kind of resets it. So when I came back in, I needed to click here. It did remember my slider settings, but I did need to click this in order to get it turned on again. So that's good to keep in mind. It's something I'm not used to coming from Photolab. So volume deformation, again, being careful of which one to choose if you've got architectural. Like I said, lots of times if it's just people in a field or some such, diagonal will work great. So what do you think? ViewPoint, interesting wee tool, and it certainly adds a lot. If you're a Photolab user, I think it adds heaps to the Photolab interface, as does FilmPack, to be fair. It really does kind of just level up the software. Certainly not essential, but just gives you some extra bits and pieces to play with. So let me know in the comments below what you think. If you use it yourself, if you use it as standalone, if you just use the functions within Photolab, if you use it in conjunction with other software, if you actually choose Nik Collection and the perspective tools that are in Nik Collection, and what the difference is there. With that, I will leave you to it. Thanks for watching, and I will talk again soon. Bye-bye.